The courtroom in Manhattan wasn't just silent. It was frozen in a state of collective shock. Everyone had come to watch Daniel Thorne, the arrogant tech mogul, destroy his quiet, penniless wife, Molly. He had live-streamed their breakup, mocked her poverty on social media, and dragged her into court to ensure she left with nothing but the clothes on her back. He thought he was the predator playing with his food. But the moment the heavy oak doors swung open and a man worth more than the entire GDP of a small country walked in, Daniel's smirk vanished. He didn't realize that the woman he was shaming wasn't a nobody. She was the only daughter of the most dangerous man on Wall Street, and Daddy was home. This is the story of how a bully found out that silence isn't weakness. It's a trap. The Honorable Judge Henry Patterson banged his gavel, the sharp sound cutting through the murmurs of the packed courtroom like a gunshot. Outside the Manhattan Supreme Court, the paparazzi were already swarming. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a public execution, and Daniel Thorne was the executioner. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, leaning back in his custom-tailored Italian suit, looking every bit the master of the universe he claimed to be. At 34, he was the face of Thorne Logistics, a shipping software company that had made him a millionaire. But money wasn't enough for Daniel. He needed adoration, and he needed dominance. He adjusted his silk tie and winked at the press gallery. He had ensured this trial was open to the public. He wanted the world to see him discard Molly. Opposite him sat Molly. She looked small in the oversized wooden chair. She wore a simple, slightly faded grey dress, the same one she had worn to their rehearsal dinner 3 years ago. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she stared at her hands, refusing to look at the cameras or the man who had promised to love her forever. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed," Judge Patterson said, looking over his spectacles with a hint of distaste. Richard Sterling, Daniel's attorney, stood up. Sterling was known in New York legal circles as the Butcher. He didn't just win cases, he humiliated the opposition. "Thank you, Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice smooth and predatory. He walked toward the witness stand where Daniel was already seated. "Mr. Thorne, tell the court why we are here today." Daniel leaned into the microphone. "We're here because I made a mistake, Your Honor. A mistake named Molly." A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. Molly didn't flinch. "Could you elaborate?" Sterling asked. "I'm a successful man," Daniel said, expanding his chest. "I built my company from the ground up. When I met Molly, she was a waitress at a diner in Queens. I felt sorry for her. She had holes in her shoes. I thought I was rescuing a damsel in distress. I didn't realize I was inviting a parasite into my home." Objection. Molly's lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Evelyn Moore, stood up. She was known as a competent, low-cost attorney, the only kind Molly could afford. Counsel is characterizing the defendant, not stating facts. "Sustained," the judge sighed. "Stick to the facts, Mr. Thorne." "The facts are simple," Daniel continued, unbothered. "She contributed nothing. Zero. I paid the mortgage, I paid for the cars, I paid for the food she ate. And how did she repay me? By refusing to attend my corporate events because she didn't fit in. By embarrassing me in front of investors with her lack of education. And finally, by stealing." Sterling held up a document. "Your Honor, we have submitted evidence, Exhibit C, showing a withdrawal of $5,000 from the joint account 2 days before Mr. Thorne filed for divorce. We believe she was hoarding cash to flee." The gallery whispered. $5,000 was pocket change to Daniel, but he was making it sound like the great train robbery. "I want a divorce," Daniel said, looking directly at Molly with cold, dead eyes. "And I want the prenup enforced strictly. She leaves with what she came in with. Nothing." Daniel's strategy was clear. He had already destroyed her reputation online. For weeks, he had been posting vague tweets about gold diggers and trust issues. He had turned their social circle against her. Friends they had made together now looked through Molly as if she were invisible. He wanted to break her spirit. He wanted her to beg. But as Daniel smirked at the jury, he missed a tiny detail. Molly wasn't trembling. She wasn't crying. Her finger was tracing a circle on the wooden table, a rhythmic, calming motion. She was waiting. The afternoon session was grueling. Sterling called character witnesses. Daniel's friends, who painted Molly as a sullen, ungrateful mood killer who spent her days watching TV while Daniel slaved away at the office. Then it was time for the cross-examination. Evelyn Moore stood up. She adjusted her glasses and walked toward Daniel. She didn't look like a high-powered attorney. She looked like a librarian. "Mr. Thorne," Evelyn began softly, "you speak frequently about your wealth. You are proud of your financial acumen, are you not?" "I know how to make money, yes." Daniel scoffed. "Unlike some people." "And you insisted on a prenuptial agreement." "Absolutely," Daniel said. "I'm not an idiot. I knew she brought nothing to the table. I wanted to protect my assets." "Let's look at that agreement. Clause 4, Section B." Evelyn read from a paper. It states, "In the event of a dissolution of marriage, each party shall retain sole ownership of all assets, debts, and liabilities acquired prior to the union, and any assets acquired during the union shall be divided based on the percentage of financial contribution to said asset." "That's right." Daniel grinned. "I paid for everything, so I keep everything. It's ironclad. My lawyers wrote it, and she signed it." "Did you force her to sign it?" "Force, no. I told her sign it or the wedding is off. She knew the deal. She wanted the meal ticket, so she signed." "So you are testifying under oath that you want this document enforced to the letter, strict adherence." 100%, Daniel said. "I want the letter of the law." Evelyn Moore paused. She looked at Molly, who finally looked up. For the first time in the trial, Molly smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. "Very well," Evelyn said. "No further questions for this witness." Daniel stepped down, high-fiving his lawyer. He thought he had won. He thought the trial was practically over. He was already planning his victory party at Le Bernardin. "Does the defense have any witnesses?" Judge Patterson asked, checking his watch. He wanted to wrap this up. It was a clear-cut case of a rich man dumping a poor wife. Routine. Boring. Evelyn Moore stood tall. Her demeanor shifted instantly. The librarian vibe vanished, replaced by a steel-spined sharpness. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls its first and only witness, Mr. Silas Vance." The name hung in the air for a second, not registering with the general public in the gallery. But the judge froze. Daniel frowned. "Who?" "Silas Vance," Evelyn repeated louder this time. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Two men in dark suits walked in, first private security, clearly former military. They scanned the room with professional paranoia. Then an older man entered. He was in his late 60s with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Daniel's car. He walked with a cane, not out of frailty, but as an accessory of power. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out. Daniel's lawyer, Sterling, went pale. He leaned over to Daniel, his whisper frantic. "Daniel, do you know who that is?" "No," Daniel whispered back, annoyed. "Some old relative of hers. Her dad is a mechanic in Ohio." "You idiot," Sterling hissed, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "That is Silas Vance, the CEO of Vance Global, the mining magnate. He owns half the shipping routes your logistics software uses. He's a billionaire, a real one." Daniel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "So what is he doing here?" Silas Vance walked past the plaintiff's table. He didn't look at Daniel. He didn't acknowledge the judge yet. He walked straight to Molly. The woman Daniel had called trash, the woman he said had holes in her shoes, stood up. Silas stopped in front of her. The room was dead silent. "Hello, Daddy," Molly said softly. Silas reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His eyes, cold as ice, when looking at the room, melted into warmth for her. "I told you he wasn't worth the trouble, Elle," Silas said, his voice deep and gravelly. "But you always had to learn the hard way." "I know," Molly whispered. "Are you ready to end this?" Silas asked. "Yes." Silas turned slowly to face Daniel. The look he gave him was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was total dismissive indifference. It was the way a boot looks at an ant. Silas walked to the witness stand and sat down. Judge Patterson cleared his throat. He looked flustered. "Mr. Vance, this is unexpected. You have been sworn in." "I know the procedure, Henry," Silas said, coolly nodding to the judge. They moved in the same circles, the ultra-elite clubs of Manhattan, where Daniel Thorne would never be allowed past the lobby. Evelyn Moore approached the stand. "Mr. Vance, please state your relationship to the defendant." "Molly Vance is my daughter," Silas said. "My only child." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. The live-stream chat, which had been mocking Molly moments ago, suddenly flooded with shock emojis. "Wait, isn't she Molly Smith Vance, like the Vance Tower in Chicago?" This guy just buried himself. Judge Patterson banged the gavel. "Order, order in this court." When the noise died down, Evelyn continued. "Mr. Vance, could you explain why your daughter has been living under the name Molly Smith, working as a waitress and married to Mr. Thorne without his knowledge of her background?" Silas folded his hands. "My daughter has always despised the weight of her inheritance. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she could buy. 5 years ago, she asked for a sabbatical from her life. She wanted to live normally. She took a minimum wage job. She lived in a studio apartment. She wanted to find a partner who loved her." Silas's eyes drifted to Daniel. "She thought she found that in Mr. Thorne. She told me she met a man who was ambitious, charming, and kind. She begged me not to interfere, not to run a background check, not to reveal myself. She wanted to tell him the truth on her own timeline." "And did she?" Evelyn asked. "She tried," Silas said. "About a year into the marriage, she called me crying. She said Daniel had changed, that the moment the ring was on her finger, the charm vanished. He became controlling. He belittled her poverty. He made her feel small to make himself feel big." Daniel gripped the table. His face was red. "This is irrelevant," he shouted. "Who cares who her dad is? She lied to me, that's fraud." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge barked. Mr. Vance, Evelyn continued, Mr. Thorne claims he supported your daughter entirely, that she brought 0 assets into the marriage. Silas let out a dry, dark chuckle. Is that so? Mr. Thorne has invoked the prenuptial agreement which states that assets acquired during the marriage are divided by contribution and assets brought into the marriage remain separate. Are you familiar with the assets Molly brought into the marriage? I am, Silas said. Could you list them? Silas reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses. He didn't need papers. He knew the numbers. When Molly turned 21, the Vance family trust matured, Silas stated calmly. She has full ownership of the Vance real estate portfolio, which includes 4 commercial skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan. She holds a 15% controlling stake in Vance Global Industries. She also possesses a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds managed by J.P. Morgan Private Client Services. And the value, Evelyn asked, the total valuation of assets legally under her name before the date of her marriage to Mr. Thorne is approximately $4.2 billion, Silas said. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Daniel Thorne's mouth fell open. He looked at Molly. She was just sitting there, smoothing her dress. 4.2 billion. Daniel was worth maybe 15 million on a good day. He was a minnow swimming next to a leviathan. So, Evelyn said, turning to face a sweating Daniel. When Mr. Thorne insisted on a prenup to protect his assets, he effectively waived any right to her billions. Correct, Silas said. He was very adamant about keeping finances separate. He didn't want her debt, so he gets none of her equity. Thank you, Mr. Vance, Evelyn said. But there is one more thing. Mr. Thorne claims he paid for everything during the marriage. The house, the cars, the lifestyle. Mr. Thorne lives in a penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, does he not? Silas asked. Yes, he does. And who owns the building? Silas asked. Evelyn smiled. Vance Real Estate Holdings. And did Mr. Thorne pay rent? He paid a maintenance fee, Silas said. But the deed? The mortgage, there isn't one. Molly owns the apartment. She let him live there. She directed the management company to list him as the tenant, so his ego wouldn't be bruised. But technically, he has been living in her house rent-free for 3 years. Daniel jumped up. That's a lie. My name is on the lease. A lease for $1 a year, Silas countered sharply. A lease that can be terminated with 30 days' notice, which I believe was issued this morning. Mr. Sterling. The judge looked at Daniel's lawyer. You might want to control your client. He is currently screaming at a man who could buy this courthouse and turn it into a parking lot. But Evelyn wasn't done. Your Honor, we are just getting started. Because while Mr. Thorne was busy protecting his millions from his wife, he forgot to protect himself from the law. She picked up a thick stack of files. We are countersuing Mr. Thorne, not for alimony, but for corporate embezzlement fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. And we have the receipts. Daniel looked at the door. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to be seen. He wanted to run. But the doors were blocked by Silas's security. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. It was starting to crush him. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted from a legal proceeding to a gladiatorial arena. Daniel Thorne, previously slouching with arrogant ease, was now sitting bolt upright, his face a mask of sheen and sweat. He looked like a man trying to hold on to water. Evelyn Moore placed the stack of files on the plaintiff's table right under Daniel's nose. The thud echoed like a coffin lid closing. Mr. Thorne. Evelyn began, her voice deceptively pleasant. You built Thorne Logistics on a series of high-value contracts, correct? Specifically, the North Star contract and the Blue Ocean shipping deal. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to regain his footing. Yes. I secured those deals through aggressive negotiation. My algorithm was superior. That's why they hired me. Your algorithm? Evelyn repeated, a dry smile playing on her lips. She turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Thorne's revolutionary algorithm was indeed functional, but it wasn't the reason he got the contracts. She turned back to Silas Vance, who was still on the stand looking down at Daniel with terrifying calm. Mr. Vance, Evelyn asked, who owns North Star Shipping? A holding company based in Delaware called Vance Maritime, Silas replied. And who owns Blue Ocean Logistics? A subsidiary of Vance Global Industries. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Even the court stenographer paused. So, Evelyn summarized, walking slowly toward Daniel. Mr. Thorne, the big breaks that made your career, the contracts that made you a millionaire, were quietly handed to you by your father-in-law. That's a lie, Daniel shouted, standing up. I pitched those deals I met with the CEOs. They loved my product. Silas leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping an octave. You met with actors, Daniel. Paid consultants I hired to sit in boardrooms and nod at your PowerPoints. I approved the contracts. I directed the funds. I wanted my daughter's husband to feel successful. I wanted you to be the man she thought you were. I subsidized your entire ego. Daniel froze. The color drained from his face so completely he looked gray. His entire identity, the self-made tech genius, the shark, was a fabrication. He was a charity case. But here is the problem, Mr. Thorne. Evelyn interjected, her tone sharpening into a blade. When Mr. Vance audited the accounts of North Star and Blue Ocean, last week he found discrepancies, significant ones. Evelyn flashed a document on the courtroom projector screens. It was a bank transfer record. This is a transfer of $250,000 from the corporate account to a shell company called Lux Consulting. Mr. Thorne, do you recognize this company? It's a vendor, Daniel stammered. Marketing. Consulting. Strange, Evelyn said. Because we had traced the registration of Lux Consulting, it's registered to a residential address in Soho, an apartment leased to a Miss Isabella Cortez. The name hung in the air. Daniel closed his eyes. Who is Isabella Cortez? Mr. Thorne, Evelyn pressed. Daniel stayed silent. Let me help you, Evelyn said. She is your personal assistant, and according to hotel manifests, flight logs to the Cayman Islands, and credit card statements, she is also your mistress. The gallery exploded. The judge banged his gavel furiously, but no one was listening. The cameras zoomed in on Molly. She sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, like a queen watching a jester set himself on fire. You embezzled money, Evelyn thundered, her voice rising over the noise. You stole money from contracts given to you by your wife's father to fund a lavish lifestyle for your mistress, all while pleading poverty in this court to deny your wife a fair settlement. It wasn't stealing, Daniel yelled, desperate. It was my company's money. I can spend it how I want. Not when the contracts explicitly forbid commingling funds for personal use, Silas interjected. Clause 12. Breach of contract. And since you moved the money across state lines, that's wire fraud. That's federal, Daniel. Federal. The word bounced around Daniel's skull. We have alerted the Southern District of New York, Evelyn said calmly. But before the marshals get here, we have one more witness, because it seems Miss Cortez has realized that the credit cards have been declined. The defense calls Isabella Cortez. The doors opened, and a woman walked in. She was stunning, tall, with raven black hair, and wearing a red dress that was perhaps a bit too bold for court. But her face wasn't bold. It was furious. She walked past Daniel without looking at him. The air around her smelled of expensive perfume and burning bridges. Daniel reached out a hand. "Bella, don't touch me," she hissed loud enough for the microphone to catch. She took the stand. She didn't look scared. She looked like a woman who had been promised a yacht and ended up on a sinking dinghy. "Miss Cortez," Evelyn said, "thank you for coming on such short notice. What was the nature of your relationship with Mr. Thorne?" "He told me he was single," Isabella said, her voice clear. "He told me he had a roommate he was trying to evict, that she was a crazy stalker." Molly raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. "He told me he was a billionaire," Isabella continued, looking at her manicured nails. "He said he owned the shipping routes. He promised me a villa in Como. He promised me—" She hesitated, then reached into her purse. She pulled out a velvet box. "He gave me this. He proposed to me 3 weeks ago. He said as soon as the leech was gone, we would get married." Evelyn walked over and took the box. She opened it. Inside sat a massive canary-yellow diamond ring. It caught the courtroom lights, dazzling the onlookers. "A beautiful ring," Evelyn noted. "Did he tell you where he got it?" "He said he bought it at an auction. He said it cost $500,000. Evelyn turned to Silas Vance. "Mr. Vance, do you recognize this ring?" Silas nodded. "I do. That is the Sun of Andalusia. It belonged to my great-grandmother. It was part of the Vance family heirlooms. I gave it to Molly on her 18th birthday. It has been missing from her safe for 6 months." The courtroom audibly sucked in a breath. Daniel had not only cheated, he had stolen his wife's family heirloom to propose to his mistress. It was a level of disrespect that was almost impressive in its depravity. "Miss Cortez," Evelyn asked, "did you know this ring was stolen?" "No," Isabella shrieked, looking horrified. "I thought he bought it. I don't want stolen property. I'm not going to jail for this loser." "Loser?" Evelyn asked. "He's broke," Isabella shouted, pointing a finger at Daniel. "I tried to use the card he gave me this morning to buy a flight to Paris. Declined. I called the bank. They said the accounts are frozen. He's a fraud. He has nothing. He told me his wife was the poor one, but he's the one swimming in debt." Isabella looked at Molly. For a second, the two women locked eyes. The mistress and the wife. "You can have him," Isabella spat at Molly. "And you can have this cheap ring back." She tossed the box onto the clerk's desk. "Actually," Silas noted dryly, "that ring is insured for $1.2 million. It is certainly not cheap. But the man who gave it to you— yes, he is very cheap." Daniel stood up, his hands shaking. "Bella, baby, listen, it's a misunderstanding. Once the settlement comes through—" "There is no settlement, Daniel," Evelyn shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "There is only restitution." Isabella stormed off the stand, ignoring the bailiff's instructions. She walked past. Daniel paused, and then in a move that would be replayed on TikTok 1 billion times. Over the next 24 hours, she took her expensive, red-soled heel and stomped hard on Daniel's foot. He yelped in pain, hopping on one leg, looking ridiculous. The master of the universe was hopping around like a wounded flamingo. The judge didn't even bang the gavel. He was hiding a smile behind his hand. The atmosphere in the courtroom had curdled. It was no longer a place of civil arbitration. It was a crime scene where a man's soul had been stripped bare, examined, and found wanting. The echo of Isabella's heels, stomping on Daniel's foot, seemed to linger in the air, a phantom sound of disrespect that signaled the end of Daniel Thorne's reign. Judge Patterson sat high on his bench, his face a mask of exhaustion and distaste. He had presided over hundreds of high-net-worth divorces in Manhattan, seen titans of industry fight over summer homes and art collections, but he had never witnessed a self-immolation quite like this. He looked down at the defense table. Daniel Thorne was alone. Technically, his lawyer, Richard Sterling, was still standing next to him, but spiritually, Sterling was already 3 zip codes away. The high-powered attorney was furiously typing on his phone, his face pale. He was doing the mental calculus of how much this disaster was going to cost his firm's reputation. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Patterson said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the gallery like a cold wind. "We are at a crossroads. Your client has just been accused under oath with corroborating evidence of embezzlement fraud and grand larceny regarding a family heirloom. Do you have a redirect? Do you have any defense to offer before I make a ruling on the assets?" The courtroom held its breath. The cameras zoomed in on Sterling. Sterling looked at Daniel. He looked at the red-faced, sweating man who had lied to him for months, who had presented forged financial documents as fact, and who had just been humiliated by his own mistress. Sterling didn't reach for a file. He didn't reach for a microphone. He reached for the clasp of his briefcase. Click, click. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Your Honor." Sterling began, his voice devoid of its usual predatory smoothness. It was sharp, clipped, and professional. "Pursuant to the New York Rules of Professional Conduct, specifically Rule 1.16, regarding the declining or terminating of representation, I am formally moving to withdraw as counsel for Mr. Thorne, effective immediately." Daniel's head snapped around, his eyes wide with panic. "Richard!" "What are you doing?" Sterling ignored him, addressing only the bench. "My client has used my services to perpetrate a crime and has insisted upon taking action that I consider repugnant and with which I have a fundamental disagreement. Furthermore, he has perjured himself in your courtroom, implicating me in the submission of falsified financial statements. I cannot in good conscience continue." "Granted," Judge Patterson said instantly. The gavel banged. "Mr. Sterling, you are excused. You can't leave me." Daniel lunged, grabbing the sleeve of Sterling's expensive suit. "I pay you, you work for me." Sterling ripped his arm away with a look of pure revulsion. "You owe me, Daniel." "There's a difference. And after what I just heard, you don't have enough money to pay me to stay." Sterling walked out. He didn't look back. He marched down the center aisle past the rows of stunned reporters, leaving Daniel standing solitary and small in the middle of the room. Daniel looked at the empty chair beside him. Then he looked at the gallery. The people he had invited, the influencers, the bloggers, his fans, were all filming him, but they weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him like a car crash. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, his tone shifting from judicial to pitying, "you are now representing yourself. Do you have anything to say regarding the distribution of marital assets?" Daniel gripped the table, his knuckles white. He was hyperventilating. This is a setup," he stammered, sweat dripping down his nose. "He's a billionaire." He pointed a shaking finger at Silas Vance. He bought the witnesses. He bought the lawyer. This is a conspiracy. Silas Vance didn't even blink. He just adjusted his cufflinks, watching Daniel unravel. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with authoritative force. The sound of heavy boots on the parquet floor echoed like thunder. Every head in the room turned. Entering the courtroom were 6 individuals. They didn't look like lawyers. They didn't look like court staff. They wore navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering emblazoned on the back and chest FBI. Leading them was a woman who looked like she chewed glass for breakfast. She was tall, wearing a tactical vest over a crisp white shirt, her badge hanging from a chain around her neck. Her eyes scanned the room, locking onto Daniel like a targeting system. This was Special Agent Miller. In the world of white-collar crime, she was known as the Reaper. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. The livestream chat, projected on a monitor in the press box, went vertical with speed. FBI. Is this real holiest? Agent Miller walked past the bar, ignoring the bailiff who stepped aside instinctively. She marched straight to the bench. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. Special Agent Miller, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I apologize for the interruption of these civil proceedings, but we have a warrant. Judge Patterson took the warrant she offered. He read it over his spectacles, his eyebrows climbing higher with every line. This is extensive, the judge murmured. We were prepared to wait until the conclusion of the trial. Agent Miller said, her voice loud enough for the microphone to catch. However, based on the testimony of Miss Cortez regarding the defendant's attempt to purchase a one-way ticket to Paris this morning, Daniel Thorne has been designated an immediate flight risk. We are executing the warrant now. Daniel backed away from the table, knocking over his water pitcher. It shattered the glass, sprawling across the floor like diamonds water soaking his Italian leather shoes. Flight risk, Daniel squeaked. I live here. I'm a CEO. Agent Miller turned to face him. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Daniel Thorne, you are under arrest. For what? Daniel screamed, his voice cracking into hysteria. I didn't do anything. Agent Miller began to recite the list, and it hit the room like a series of physical blows. You are charged with 3 counts of wire fraud under Title 18 United States Code Section. You are charged with securities fraud for the falsification of Thorne Logistics revenue streams. You are charged with interstate transportation of stolen property regarding the Son of Andalusia diamond, and thanks to the forensic audit provided by Vance Global this morning, you are charged with aggravated identity theft for opening lines of credit in your wife's name without her consent. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel looked at the exit. 2 agents were blocking it. He looked at the judge. Patterson was purposefully looking away. He looked at the only person left. Molly. Daniel stumbled toward the plaintiff's table, his hands out, pleading. The agents moved to intercept him, but Molly raised a hand. Wait, she said softly. The agents paused. The room watched. Molly stood up. She smoothed the front of her simple grey dress. She walked around the table, moving into the open space between the lawyers' benches. She stopped 3 feet from Daniel. He looked pathetic. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization of a caged animal. Molly, baby, please. Daniel wept, tears streaming freely now, mixing with the snot running from his nose. You can't let them take me. Federal prison. I won't survive there. I'm your husband. We took vows. For better or worse, right? This is just the worse part. We can fix this. He reached out to touch her, but he stopped, sensing the invisible wall of ice around her. "Tell your dad to call it off," Daniel whispered frantically. "He can make a call. I know he can. I'll sign anything. I'll sign the divorce papers. I'll give you the company. Just don't let them put me in cuffs." Molly looked at him. Really looked at him. For 3 years she had looked at him with love, then with confusion, then with fear. Now she looked at him with the clarity of a microscope. "You can't give me the company, Daniel," she said, her voice low but steady, picked up perfectly by the court microphones. "You don't own it. You never did. It was built on my father's contracts, funded by my father's money, and run on an algorithm you stole from a developer in Bangalore." Daniel flinched as if she'd slapped him. I loved you, Molly. In the beginning. I really did." "No." Molly shook her head slowly. "You loved that I was small. You loved that I was poor. You loved having someone to look down on because it was the only way you could feel tall. You didn't marry a partner, Daniel. You married an audience." She reached into her small, worn purse. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finality. She pulled out a small, crumpled slip of thermal paper. It was yellowed with age. She stepped forward and tucked it into the breast pocket of his suit jacket, right over his pounding heart. What is this?" Daniel stammered. "The receipt," Molly said. "From the diner in Queens, our first date. You paid for 2 coffees and a slice of pie, $6.50. She stepped back, her eyes hard as diamonds. "You spent 3 years reminding me that you saved me from that life. You threw every dollar you spent in my face. So I'm returning the favor." Molly leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a shout in the silent room. "I'm keeping the billions, Daniel. I'm keeping the real estate. I'm keeping the name. But that receipt, that's yours. You're leaving this marriage exactly how you wanted me to leave it." "Molly, no. With nothing," she finished. She turned her back on him. "Agent Miller, he's all yours." "No, Molly!" Daniel screamed a primal sound of terror. The agents swarmed him. There was no dignity in it. They spun him around, slamming him chest first against the defense table. Daniel kicked and thrashed, knocking his chair to the floor with a loud clatter. "I'm a victim here," Daniel shrieked as the metal cuffs ratcheted tight around his wrists. Click, click, click. "She tricked me. It's fraud." "She pretended to be poor. That's entrapment." Agent Miller grabbed him by the back of his collar and his cuffed arm. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Thorne," she said, dryly, hauling him upright. "I suggest you start using it." The walk of shame was brutal. The paparazzi in the front row didn't just take photos. They stood up to get better angles. The flashes were a strobe light of humiliation, illuminating Daniel's tear-streaked face, his disheveled suit, and the sheer terror in his eyes. "Daddy, help me!" Daniel screamed at Silas as they dragged him past the witness stand. Silas Vance didn't look at Daniel. He was busy inspecting the handle of his cane as if checking for a scratch. The ultimate insult. He didn't even deem Daniel worthy of a glare. The agents hauled him through the center aisle. The doors swung open, and the noise from the hallway, the swarm of press outside who couldn't get in, roared like a beast. "Malia!" The wail faded as the heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing the courtroom. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and profound. Molly stood in the center of the floor, her back to the door. Her shoulders were rigid. She took a breath. A shudder went through her. the physical release of 3 years of holding up a crumbling sky. Silas Vance stood up. Despite his age and his cane, he moved with surprising speed. He walked down from the stand and approached his daughter. He didn't say a word. He simply opened his arms. Molly stepped into them, burying her face in her father's shoulder. She didn't cry. She was done crying over Daniel Thorne. She just breathed. "It's over, Elle," Silas whispered into her hair. "The trash has been taken out." Molly pulled back. She wiped her eyes not to clear tears, but to clear her vision. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I apologize for the disruption." Judge Patterson looked at the woman standing before him. He had seen her walk in hours ago looking like a victim. She now looked like a titan. "No apology necessary, Mrs. Vance," the judge said, using her maiden name with deliberate respect. "In fact, I believe that was the most productive use of this court's time in 20 years. He picked up his gavel, twirling it in his fingers. "Now," the judge said, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes, "the defendant has been arrested, his counsel has fled, and his assets are frozen by the federal government. I believe we have a divorce to finalize. Shall we proceed with the summary judgment?" Molly nodded, taking her seat next to Evelyn Moore. She sat tall. The chair didn't swallow her anymore. "Yes, Your Honor," Molly said. "Let's finish it." The heavy oak doors had swallowed Daniel's screams, leaving the courtroom in a silence that felt vibrating and electric. But while the criminal drama had concluded with the click of handcuffs, the civil execution was just beginning. The machinery of the law does not stop for tears, and it certainly does not stop for federal arrests. Judge Patterson, having regained his composure after the spectacle of the FBI raid, adjusted his spectacles. He looked down at the defense table. It was a desolate landscape, an overturned chair, a puddle of spilled water, and a few legal pads fluttering in the draft from the air conditioning. "Let the record show," the judge intoned, his voice scratching across the silence, "that the plaintiff Daniel Thorne is no longer present due to involuntary federal detainment. His counsel has withdrawn. The court will proceed ex parte." Evelyn Moore, Molly's attorney, stood up. She didn't look tired. She looked like a surgeon ready to close the patient. She approached the bench with a new stack of documents. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice crisp, "we move for immediate summary judgment on the divorce decree. Given Mr. Thorne's incarceration and the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud presented today, we ask that the prenuptial agreement be enforced strictly as was Mr. Thorne's original emphatic request." "The court agrees," Judge Patterson said, writing furiously on his docket. "The prenuptial agreement is upheld. All assets brought into the marriage by Ms. Vance remain her sole property. All debts incurred by Mr. Thorne remain his sole liability." Evelyn paused, glancing at Silas Vance, who gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "There is the matter of the marital assets, Your Honor," Evelyn continued, "specifically the company known as Thorne Logistics." The judge frowned, looking at the forensic accounting file. "Ms. Moore, according to the federal warrant we just heard, Thorne Logistics is effectively a hollow shell. Its revenue was falsified, its contracts are void due to fraud, and it currently carries a debt load of nearly $4 million to various creditors, including the insurance payout for the stolen diamond ring." "Correct," Evelyn said. "The company is insolvent. If it goes into bankruptcy, the 200 employees, developers, support, staff, janitors will lose their jobs immediately. They will lose their pensions. They will be collateral damage in Daniel's war of ego." Molly stood up. She walked to the railing. "Your Honor, I don't want that," she said. "Those people worked hard. They believed in the lie just as much as I did." "What are you proposing, Mrs. Vance?" the judge asked. "A hostile acquisition," Evelyn answered. "Ms. Vance is offering to purchase 100% of the equity in Thorn Logistics, along with its intellectual property and its liabilities. She will assume the $4 million in debt, personally preventing the company from collapsing." The judge blinked. "She wants to buy a sinking ship. Why?" "To patch the holes and sail it under a new flag," Molly said firmly. "But since the company has a negative valuation and the owner is currently being processed at Federal Holding, the offer price reflects the current market value of Daniel Thorne's legacy." "And what is that offer?" Molly placed a single crisp bill on the wooden railing. $1, she said. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. $1. It was the ultimate dismissal. It wasn't a purchase. It was a statement. Daniel had spent his life chasing billions, and in the end, his life's work was being sold for less than the price of the coffee he bought on their first date. The judge looked at the dollar. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who appreciated poetic justice. "The court accepts the valuation," Judge Patterson ruled, banging the gavel one final time. "Thorn Logistics is sold to Molly Vance for the sum of $1. The divorce is final. Case closed." 3 months later. The concrete tomb. The Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Lower Manhattan is a fortress of misery. It smells of industrial disinfectant, stale bologna, and human sweat. It is a place designed to strip a man of his humanity layer by layer. Molly sat in the visitor's booth on the 9th floor. She was no longer wearing the faded grey dress. She wore a tailored white suit that screamed authority. Armani sharp lines, pristine fabric. Her hair was loose, a cascade of waves. She sat with her legs crossed, checking the time on a Patek Philippe watch. On the other side of the reinforced plexiglass, a door buzzed. Daniel Thorne walked in. Or rather, the shell of Daniel Thorne walked in. He had lost 20 pounds. His bespoke Italian suits were replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that hung off his gaunt frame like a sack. His hair, once gelled to perfection, was shaved close to the scalp, revealing the uneven shape of his skull. He had a patchy beard, grey hairs sprouting prematurely from the stress. He shuffled to the stool and sat down. He picked up the black phone receiver with trembling hands. He looked at Molly, and for a moment he didn't seem to recognize her. She was glowing. He was rotting. "You came," Daniel rasped. His voice was scratchy, unused to normal volume after weeks of whispering in a cell to avoid angering the gangs. "I did," Molly said calmly into her receiver. Her voice was clear, unaffected by the static of the line. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes desperate and watery. "Molly, God, you look beautiful. You look like an angel." "Save the compliments, Daniel. The meter is running." "Molly, you have to get me out of here." Daniel began the words, tumbling out in a panic. "It's hell. You don't understand. The things I've seen. I can't sleep. They scream all night. The food. I'm starving, Elle. I'm starving." He pressed his hand against the glass. "I know you're still angry. I get it. I was a jerk. I was stressed with the business. But 10 years. The lawyer said the feds are asking for 10 years. You can't let them do that to your husband." Molly watched him beg. She remembered the time she had begged him for money to buy a winter coat, and he told her to budget better. She remembered begging him to come to her grandmother's funeral, and he said he had a golf game. "I'm not your husband, Daniel," she said coldly. "The divorce was finalized 90 days ago." "It's a piece of paper," Daniel hissed. "We had a life. I built that company for us, for our future." Molly laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but it was devoid of humor. "You built nothing. You stole. You lied. And speaking of the company," she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a glossy magazine. It was the latest issue of Forbes. On the cover was Molly looking powerful and serene. The headline read, "From Ashes to Empire. The Rise of Phoenix Systems." She held it up to the glass. "Thorn Logistics doesn't exist anymore," she said. "I bought it. For $1. Daniel's eyes widened, his jaw dropping. You bought my company. I bought my father's assets back," she corrected. "I fired your entire executive team, all the yes men who helped you cook the books. But I kept the engineers. I kept the support staff. We rebranded. It's called Phoenix Systems now. We just landed a government defense contract worth $300 million. "That's my code," Daniel screamed, slamming the receiver against the glass. "That's my genius. It was never your genius, Daniel. It was the team you ignored. I listened to them. I gave them equity. They fixed your buggy code in a week." Daniel slumped back, defeated. The realization hit him harder than the prison sentence. He hadn't just lost his freedom. He had been erased. His name was gone from the building. His legacy was scrubbed clean. "Why did you come here?" Daniel whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. "To gloat. To kick me while I'm down." "No," Molly said. She leaned in close to the glass. "I came to say thank you." Daniel blinked, confused. "Thank you." "Yes. Thank you." Molly's eyes softened, not with pity, but with a strange kind of gratitude. "For 3 years I played small. I hid my background, my money, my power, because I wanted to be loved for me. I thought being weak made me lovable." She paused, looking at the broken man before her. "You taught me that silence isn't a virtue, Daniel. It's a vulnerability. You pushed me so far into the corner that I had to remember who I was. I had to remember that I am a Vance. I had to remember that I am a lioness. Molly, please. So thank you." She finished, standing up and smoothing her suit. "Your cruelty was the catalyst I needed. You didn't break me, Daniel. You built me. Don't leave me." Daniel stood up, the chain of his handcuffs rattling against the metal table. "I have no money. Sterling sued me. The IRS took everything I can't afford. Commissary Molly, send me money. Just a few thousand. Please." Molly looked at him one last time. She saw the greed that still lived in his eyes, even in prison. He didn't want her love. He wanted her wallet. He hadn't changed. He never would. "You said you wanted me to leave with what I came in with." Molly set her hand on the door handle. "I came in with my dignity. I'm leaving with it." "And what about me?" Daniel screamed. "What do I have?" Molly smiled. "You have the receipt, Daniel, from the diner. I hope it keeps you warm." She hung up the phone. She walked out of the booth. She didn't look back at the man, banging his fists against the shatterproof glass, mouthing her name in a silent scream that no one would ever hear again. Molly walked out of the MCC detention center and into the bright, crisp sunlight of a New York autumn. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. A black town car was idling at the curb. The rear window rolled down, revealing Silas Vance. He looked at his daughter, not the timid girl who had run away to Queens to be a waitress, but the woman who had just stared down a monster and won. The driver opened the door for her. "How was he?" Silas asked as she slid onto the leather seat. "Bankrupt," Molly said, "in every sense of the word." "Good," Silas nodded. "I spoke to the warden. He's been assigned to laundry duty. 6 cents an hour. It will take him roughly 400 years to pay back what he owes." Molly chuckled. She looked out the window as the car pulled away, merging into the chaotic, beautiful traffic of the city. She saw the skyline, the steel and glass towers reaching for the clouds. One of those towers belonged to her now. Not because her father gave it to her, but because she had taken command of it. "Where to, boss?" the driver asked, looking at her in the rear-view mirror. Molly checked her phone. She had a board meeting at 2:00 p.m., a charity gala at 7:00 p.m., and a life to live in between. "Take us to the office," Molly said. "We have an empire to run." As the car sped off, leaving the gloomy prison fortress behind, Molly Vance didn't just feel rich. For the first time in her life, she felt free. And that is how Daniel Thorne learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is backed by a billion-dollar library. He wanted to shame his wife publicly, but he ended up exposing his own fraud to the world. It's a brutal reminder that in the court of law and the court of karma, the truth always has a way of coming out. Daniel thought he was the main character, but he was just the villain in Molly's origin story. If you enjoyed this story of massive karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good revenge drama, and subscribe with notifications on, so you never miss the next story. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Daniel deserved 10 years, or was losing his company enough punishment? I'll see you in the next video.